Welcome everyone to another episode of Lein in the Library / Classroom. Today we had to relocate due to a scheduling conflict, but I'm excited because we're here today with Connor Wheeler, who's going to be teaching us about the history of American football, specifically the NFL. Welcome, Connor.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be so interested in football?
Okay, so I'm 15 years old and I've been playing football since I was around 4 years old. I started with flag and started playing tackle when I was like 6, and I've just loved it ever since, and that's what made me started watching the NFL.
So were you one of those like tiny people with the enormous helmet running around? They're so cute. Okay. So you started is that Pee Wee or is there something before Pee Wee?
It started out as like the flag league I was in was just a bunch of my dad's friends. They literally made a league by themselves and had like a ton of kids playing.
Like, hey, let's give our kids brain damage.
That's
fun. Okay, fun. Great stuff. I love America. All right, so let's get into it. Tell us a bit about the history of American football.
Okay, so I kind of wanted to do 2 different groups of like the evolution of the equipment used in the NFL and the evolution of like the most famous players.
Go for it.
So the NFL was founded in 1920 by a group of people, including Jim Thorpe and Walter Flanagan. In the 1920s and 30s, the equipment was not safe at all. Like it was literally leather, just like a leather hat and leather shoulder pads. And then it evolved in the 1950s, maybe a little bit before, to actual metal and plastic helmets and shoulder pads. And then in the early 2000s, actually no, the 1980s and 90s, the helmets finally had face masks, and the face masks just protect your face from getting hit. And in the 1990s, it only had 1 bar, so like it still wasn't safe because there was like a big hole, and there was just 1 bar, like protecting your teeth area.
I feel like that was mostly for the kickers. I feel like it was kickers that you'd sometimes see with these goofy looking helmets with only that 1 bar. I do remember watching football growing up, and they did have mostly the full mask in the 90s, but maybe back in like 70s and 80s, yeah, it was 1 bar. It wasn't much. So my dad actually had one of those leather helmets as like an antique he'd somehow acquired. And so yeah, you watch those old films, you're like, these dudes were insane.
Yeah. And then in the early 2000s is when the more futuristic helmets began being made, and they had the straps where you pull it from the chin strap and strap it onto the side of your helmet, and it keeps it tight. And the bars on the face mask began to get tighter and like more compact, so where you wouldn't get hit in the head and die.
Hopefully, yeah.
And then the shoulder pads where they used to be like ginormous.
Yes.
Like ginormous. And then in the 1990s and the early 2000s, they began to get smaller. And so it made people more mobile and do more things. And yeah, that's the equipment part of it.
Now, did your research take you anywhere into like concussion prevention with helmets?
I didn't do any.
Okay. Yeah, that's something interesting to look into, is the way that the science behind concussion prevention has it's improved incredibly. Because the number of concussions that players sustain, they don't even know how many. Most of the time they would just say, oh, he got his bell rung. And maybe the player would go off on the sideline for 1 play, but then they put him back in. And a lot of those players now just have, like Brett Favre comes to mind, a classic kind of 90s gunslinger who would just get the crap kicked out of him out there on the field. He's really struggling with his memory now. All right, so that was kind of the history of the equipment, though. It's gotten a lot safer, though I still think about rugby occasionally and how tough those guys are. So what was the other topic, like the history of the league itself?
I was going to talk about the famous players.
Oh, the famous players. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so in the 1920s and 30s, the most infamous people playing at the time were Jim Thorpe, which he helped found the NFL, and he was a running back. And Steve Owen, he was the only lineman I put on this list, but he played offensive line as a tackle, and those were the two like most notorious players in the 1920s. And then the 1950s through the 60s, Otto Graham, he was a quarterback. He was, not many people know about him, but I feel like he was one of the better quarterbacks of all time.
Who do you play for?
He played for the Cardinals when they weren't called the Cardinals.
I forget what they were called.
I forgot.
Crimsons or something? I forget. Yeah. Okay.
But and then Jim Brown, he was a running back. I'm not sure what team he played for.
Cleveland Browns.
Might as well.
Yep.
And then in the 1980s and the 90s, Joe Montana, I feel like a lot of people know him.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very good quarterback for 49ers. And then Jerry Rice, he was a wide receiver for the 49ers.
Greatest of all time. Yep.
Yeah. And early 2000s, Peyton Manning, best quarterback of all time, in my opinion. Not a Tom Brady lover.
You can't skip Tom Brady though. I mean, 7 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with 7 Super Bowls.
And then Ray Lewis, he was a linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
He was ginormous.
Big dude.
Yeah. And then in the 2010 era, Tom Brady could be the best quarterback of all time.
He's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Maybe,
And
under your
then
breath.
my favorite player of all time, Calvin Johnson, aka Megatron.
It's a good choice. Great man.
Yeah.
He's a great leader in his community. You left out a name though. It's pretty important. Super Bowl trophy. Who's it named after?
I forget.
He won the first Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers as coach. Vince Lombardi.
Oh yeah.
Yes, he was the coach of the Packers. They named the trophy after him. So actually, did your research carry you into the merger between the AFL and the NFL?
I didn't write anything down about it, but I saw the AFL was made to like rival with the NFL.
Yes. So there's the American Football League and the National Football League.
Football League.
They merged into the one national, and now we have the NFC and the AFC, which is made up of a lot of the teams from before, plus the expansion teams. So, all right. So that's a bit of a history of football itself. Why is football so great? Why is it worth getting into? If listeners out there aren't into football, why should they think about it?
Well, the reason I like football is because if I'm feeling stressed about something, you could just go out on the field and play football, and your mind forgets everything and just focuses on football. That's the main reason I love it.
Okay.
Head clear.
What does it take to be a great football player?
You definitely need to practice a lot. You need to have focus and listen to your coaches.
And what do you mean by practice? What do you do in practice?
Well, if you're an offensive player, it could be things like learning your formations, learning how to run specific routes if you're a wide receiver. If you're a quarterback, there's all kinds of practice you need. Throwing power, ball placement, all of that stuff. And then defensive practice, tackling is probably the most major part of football.
Mm-hmm.
And like knowing your formations to cover the offense.
I only played football for 1 year in 8th grade, and I remember the thing that surprised me the most was it is a lot harder to tackle somebody than it looks. The college and pro players make it look very easy.
Yeah.
It almost looks like they're made out of Velcro, that the moment they hit the other player, they're stuck to them. And the truth is that requires unbelievable strength and agility to be able to grab a person who's moving at you at maybe 20 miles an hour. And there's something else that you don't notice when you watch it. Getting hit by a runner hurts.
Yeah,
And that's what the really good running backs will do, is they'll punish.
Yeah.
their
When
time.
I was doing research about one of the players I mentioned, it was like he quoted and said, getting hit by a running back at full speed is kind of like getting in a car wreck.
Yes.
Like it hurts that bad.
Yes. It is not pleasant. And I'm guessing the pain doesn't stop being painful just because you like the game or you play it a lot.
Yeah.
So how do you feel after a full game?
You feel like you just want to collapse where you are and just go into a deep sleep for a long time.
Yeah. So I mean, you guys have had some hard-fought victories, and there was that one close loss against Catholic. So at the end of that game, physically, you probably
Drained.
drained. Yeah. So what'd you do the next day to recover?
Slept.
pretty much the whole day.
And you make sure to eat right and drink right.
Let's talk about that. What does it mean to eat right and drink right?
You want to eat a lot of meats and lay off the sugar and stuff like that. And for drinking, lay off the soda, drink water. People say Gatorade, but I don't think Gatorade is good for you unless you're playing a sport because there's a way too much sugar in Gatorade. So water is probably the best option, but and to stay hydrated, you can drink pickle juice. I drink pickle juice, and it keeps you very hydrated.
Pickle juice. Yeah, they're not selling that at Starbucks. With a tip with Gatorade that I actually use because I don't play football, but I hike, and you're out there hiking 12 miles.
Yeah.
You're going to get dehydrated. Is that you can mix the Gatorade with water, and it cuts it quite a bit, and so it also prolongs the sugar intake, so that you're not bombarding your liver and gallbladder with sugar, and instead there's the slow intake, and your body can process it better and actually get the benefit of those electrolytes. So you said meats. What kind of meats are we talking here? Like burgers?
No, definitely not burgers.
Of course not. What kind of meats are in your diet?
I eat a lot of pork, like pork loin, and I do eat a lot of burgers. But that's...
With the amount you're exercising, you can get away with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is kind of a side note. I actually had a roommate in Florida once who was a Cirque du Soleil performer. This guy looked like an Olympian. He would come home with bags full of McDonald's and just look at him like, I hate you so much. But I mean, the amount the dude was exercising just wiped it all out so quickly. All right, so practice involves, really depends on your position. So what position do you play?
I play a lot of different positions, actually. I play running back, wide receiver, and cornerback.
Which one do you play most?
Cornerback.
Okay, so what does practice look like for you as a cornerback?
Being a corner, you have to know your formations. That's the biggest part of everything.
Now, what is a formation for the people who've only watched football casually while it's on the television on Saturday or Sunday?
A formation is the way the offense or defense lines up.
Okay.
And so when you're playing corner, your goal is to stop the wide receivers from catching the ball. So if there's 2 wide receivers on your side, you have to know what formation that is, which that's cover 2. And then you have to do your job. And if you don't, they score. And
okay. Can you just knock the receiver over so he can't catch the ball?
No.
Why not?
Because that's a flag. It's pass interference.
Oh, so it's a penalty?
Yeah.
Okay. What about in the first 5 yards?
Yeah, you can jam them, right off the line.
So, you can grab them?
Yeah.
Can you hold them?
No.
But you can get in their way?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one thing about American football is it has more rules than probably all the other major sports combined. There's soccer, which has 2 rules pretty much. No hands and don't go off sides.
Yeah.
And you can't hurt the goalie. I guess that's a rule too. But American football has a lot of rules. So do you ever forget one of those rules in the middle of a play? Have you ever accidentally face masked somebody or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to that stuff, yeah, but I don't forget the basic rules.
You ever gone out of bounds and then come back in on a play? You're not supposed to do that either.
I've never done that.
Well, Connor, thank you so much for coming in and telling us all this cool stuff about the history of football, some of those great players, whether you love Tom Brady or hate him. He is considered great. Any final thoughts about football and why it's so great?
I think that's it.
All right, man. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.